1. It was the winter of 2015, and I was working at a doctor's office in Branson, Missouri. I'd just gotten a new iPhone and was excited to try out the time-lapse mode for its camera. On my drive home from work one early evening, I decided to stop and capture the sunset over Table Rock Lake. It was a gorgeous evening, and the winter sun would be setting soon. I parked my SUV at a state park entry point parking lot, and was the only car in sight. But that didn't alarm me. I hopped out and realized how incredibly chilly it was. It was sunny, but blistering cold. I opened the back of my vehicle and put on some gloves and a better pair of shoes, and then I took off down a trail that led to the edge of the lake. I noticed the Branson Belle showboat slowly making its way across the lake for its sunset voyage, and I thought it'd be neat to capture it in the time-lapse. I was a single 31-year-old female with a lifetime of experience doing risky things on my own without consequence. The path down to the water was marked with large rocks on each side. I was in a hurry to get down to the shore and get into recording position. I found my footing and fell down hard. My head rested on a pointy-shaped big rock, and I think would have knocked me out had I not managed to literally stop the impact at the moment we collided. My knee and one of my hands stung badly. It suddenly hit me how stupid this was, because no one knew where I was. And I nearly incapacitated myself on a vacant trail in freezing temperatures, with it being minutes from dark nonetheless. As I sat there recovering from my fall, I decided I was close enough to the shore, and I just filmed right where I fell. I was about to find out that falling down was the least of my worries. "Gonna borrow a light?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around and there he was. He was standing about 20 feet behind me. I replied to him that I was sorry, but I didn't have a lighter because I didn't smoke. "I saw you getting out of your car up there. You have a real nice ass." Where had he been? There seriously wasn't a soul in sight when I parked and headed down the trail. The next part you might find hard to believe because I myself still cannot grasp that there are people out there like this. But his fourth sentence to me, and within less than a minute of appearing, he said, "Do you want to fuck?" I knew I was in a lot of trouble. No one would hear me if I were to scream. Sure, the Branson Belle was out in the water, but it was several football field lengths away, and I'm sure I was invisible to them. They wouldn't hear me over the sounds of the massive ship anyhow. Without missing a beat, I told him it was too cold to do it outside, and we should go to my car to do it. I pretended to be interested. In my mind, I just knew I needed to get off this trail before the sun went down. And obviously, I'd abandoned capturing the sunset. I don't recall all the things he said during the walk up to the parking lot. But when he asked if he could touch my butt during the walk, I happily agreed. I knew it was a test. I still wasn't 100% sure he was going to let me make it off the trail, and anything I could do or say to please him on that walk was my ticket out. How had I gotten myself into this awful situation? God, I was stupid. Just please let me make it out of this, and I swear I'll be smarter. He kept his hand down the back of my pants for the rest of the walk. We made it to the parking lot, but much to my disappointment, I was still the only car there other than a vehicle that wasn't parked in a real spot, and hadn't been there earlier. I knew it was his car. He'd been hiding and watching me, and then he'd pulled up to the trail entrance and left his car at it before following me. You may ask why I didn't call 911 on the trail. Well, he was watching my every move, and I wanted to make it off the trail unharmed and alive. I figured it being below freezing was a good excuse to refuse to do what he wanted to do out there on the trail, but please him by promising to do it somewhere warmer. Unfortunately, the parking lot was far enough off the regular highway that passing cars couldn't see it. My next mission was to make it to my own vehicle and escape. We were standing by his car, and he continued saying things that he was going to do to me that seemed too graphic for me to write about. I was still playing along. I tried to get his name and number out of him, but he refused both. Why would someone refuse to even give you their name? He began unzipping his pants and trying to get me to do things to him. So I insisted he walk to my SUV. First, though, he grabbed something out of his car, and I never got a good look at it, but I'm pretty sure it was a handgun. We walked across the parking lot towards my car. I pushed unlock, knowing that only pushing it once would unlock the driver's side door. I had my keys in ready position. I jumped in as he was attempting to open the passenger door. I threw it in reverse, and backed up as the tires spun on loose gravel. Then I put it into drive and floored it. I was too afraid to look in the rearview mirror. I called 911 and gave them his description. Oddly, he was a handsome enough guy, stood about 6 foot tall, blonde hair, brown eyes, medium to fair skin, a slightly muscular build and nice features, probably around 25 to 30 years old. You wouldn't look at him and think anything remarkable or otherwise. I wasn't ever in a position to see his license plate, but I told them about his car. He drove an older, possibly early 90s pale blue car. It reminded me of my great-grandmother's Oldsmobile. I didn't even have a first name to give them. After taking down my information, I never heard from anyone regarding my report again. I may never know exactly what he has done, but I do know that I sensed the presence of absolute evil that evening. 2. So this happened last summer over the course of 3 days. I had just moved to a new city after getting promoted at my job. I had to move quick, like 3 weeks after I got promoted, and I didn't know anyone in the city except for one old college friend who had his own house, with an open guest room. It was in a very sketchy part of town, but thought it'd be a perfect spot to crash for a couple months until I got established. That section of town was basically mostly abandoned warehouses, with a few very old and run-down houses scattered in between that were never bought out, one of which was his. His girlfriend lived about an hour away and he worked remotely, so sometimes he'd spend days away at a time. And even though I'm a grown dude that looks threatening, being alone at that house in a new city used to freak me out after dark. It was a place where you'd always be wondering if you just heard a firework or a gunshot. The nearest houses, the ones that weren't abandoned, were usually all quiet by like 10 p.m., and there was no reason to be in this part of town at night unless you lived there. So hearing any night sounds were always a cause for concern because of break-ins, drug addicts, etc. About 3 weeks into living there, Mark was gone at his girlfriend's, and I was smashed from working and fell asleep early. I woke up at 1 a.m. to sounds right outside my window, which sounded like someone was messing with our large city-issued trash cans. Not wanting to get involved and not minding if someone was trying to jack our recyclables, I eventually fell back asleep, even though it felt like they were messing around out there for like an hour. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, I was surprised to see that all the trash was put back in the cans. The only weird thing is that personal letters with mine and Mark's names on them, bills, spam mail that was addressed to us, etc., were all removed and neatly stacked on the ground next to the cans. Weird part is they had been sorted into 2 piles, one for mine, I had switched this house to my mailing address, and a larger pile for Mark's mail. I just assumed it was a weird obsessive act of a meth addict or something, and threw them back in the trash. Next night, I totally forgot about it, didn't think it was a concern. I got up to use the restroom at like 3 in the morning and heard someone outside again messing with our trash cans, like ripping apart a new bag I'd put in there, which was just like cut veggies and other food waste. I must have woken up angry and courageous, because I grabbed a baseball bat and turned on our lights on the side of the house. I threw some shoes on, but by the time I got out there, I saw some guy kind of speed walking away, like 100 feet from me. Weird thing is that he looked just like an average guy and not a drifter or addict type that would be more common around our place that late. It looked like he was literally wearing khakis and a dark t-shirt. I was exhausted, pissed and confused, but I went back to sleep. Figured it may not even be the same guy as the night before. So this last night I was thinking about it when I fell asleep. I did wake up eventually. I was half asleep the whole night, I think, listening for noises. And I forget what time it was, but I heard what I thought was initially like a high-pitched scraping sound against not my window, but the wall of the house. Like someone running a thin piece of metal against a surface. Then I realized I was just barely awake, and nobody was actually scraping our house at all. But it was like a high-pitched crying noise. But it was soft and screeching, with the cries in long bursts, which was what my tired brain thought was the scratching noise. Like someone was really crying hard, but doing everything they could to contain the noise. But they were so upset, they couldn't hold it all in. I sort of froze and lied there, and listening to it. And whoever this person was just like 5 feet from me, separated just by my wall. Wondering what I should do. I wanted to make sure it was a person and not an animal or something. But lying there and listening, I definitely heard some sighs and sniffles that were obviously human. And in hindsight, I think it was a very distraught man. I pictured him in his 40s, but have no way of knowing his age. I thought about calling the cops, but didn't know what I'd say. So I just laid there for about 15 minutes until I heard him shuffling away. Then looked outside the bathroom window on that side of the house to see the trash can lid was open, but the contents weren't really messed with. I lived there another 2 months and never experienced anything like this after that. I told Mark about all this when he was home. He said he had no idea who it could have been, or if it was different people, or why they would have gone through our mail like that. It was definitely creepy, but I never felt in any danger or anything during those days. It was just a weird occurrence, something of the like I've never experienced before or since. Anyway, let's not meet to whomever that person was. And I'm not sure I want to know what the hell you were doing those 3 nights. 3. When I first met the Bagman, I was 16. I didn't even think he was anything to worry about at the time. He just passed me by while I was biking around in one of my city's forest preserves called Riverside. Riverside was always a place I could go when I was feeling stressed or anxious. So when I passed by this rugged-looking guy in the middle of the woods, I didn't think much of it. I had other things in my mind. And for all I know, I could have looked pretty rugged myself, being all sweaty and wearing a black hoodie and biking around like a maniac. He and I were similarly dressed. I didn't have long to look at him, as I was passing by on my bike pretty quickly. But he was wearing black sweatpants that were ripped in several places, along with muddy white shoes and a black hoodie, which he wore with the hood down. I could also make out that he was a pretty big guy in all areas. He was fairly wide and was actually pretty tall. His hair was brown and down to his shoulders. I couldn't really make out his face at the time, but little did I know I would see it in a few weeks. When he saw me coming towards him on my bike, he held up his hand all excitedly and waved at me, and then began to jog while I got closer. I thought at the time that maybe he was out here exercising like me, but seeing me made him remember to start running again or something. But as I passed him, he got so close to my bike that he almost bumped into me. I had to swerve a little to the right to try to avoid him, barely missing him. When I passed him, I kind of heard him shout something back at me, but I couldn't really understand what it was because I had my headphones in. I shrugged the situation off as I continued to bike back to my car. It took me a few minutes to get back to the parking lot, and I was pretty exhausted as I loaded my bike into the back of my minivan. Once I closed the trunk, I looked around for a moment to see if the guy I'd seen earlier was around. I didn't see him, but the only other car that was parked there was directly across from me on the other side of the lot. It was a long, white van, like the stereotypical pedophile van. It was dirty and muddy like the man driving it, and the windows were tinted, so you couldn't really see inside. Thinking back in this situation now, it could have been totally possible that the bagman followed behind me all the way back to the parking lot, and had gotten into his creepy van before I could see him, and was in there while I was staring at that vehicle. He could have been watching me through those dark windows and I didn't even know. When I pulled out of the parking lot, I made sure that the van stayed in its place as I passed by and drove home. That was my first encounter with the bagman. But obviously that meeting isn't what gave him his name. A little over 3 weeks later, after my experience at Riverside, I was home alone and it was approximately 4 p.m. I was watching YouTube on my phone while laying in bed upstairs in my room. My dog was next to me and we were both just chilling until my dad came home from work. While I was up to go to the bathroom, I heard the doorbell ring and then 2 loud bangs on the door. Now usually when someone pounded on the door like that, it was almost always my mom because she, for some reason, likes to freak out the dog when she gets home, and a few loud bangs on the door would do the job. So my dog went running out of my room and tore down the steps to get to the front door. I followed behind him, but I didn't really feel like running. When I finally got to the door, I swung it open, expecting to see my mom. It wasn't her. It was the guy from Riverside. He was just standing there with a big black garbage bag in his hand. He was wearing almost the same outfit that he was wearing when I saw him last, except his shoes were all clean now. I looked up at his face and saw he had a poorly trimmed beard that covered most of his face. His eyes were a bright blue and they stared down at me. He spoke before I had a chance to say anything. Now this will be a rough paraphrase of what he said, as I don't remember exactly. "Hi there, young man. Is Melanie around? I'd love to see her." No, I don't know who that is. Sorry." I actually knew who he was asking for because she lived a few houses down. I think at that point I had given him kind of a smile to try to act like I wasn't completely freaked out. You see, I always park my minivan out right in front of my house, so it's always in view whenever I'm home. This means that he probably recognized it and me. As if on cue, he said, "I think I know you from somewhere, pal." His voice was deep and haunting, and just kind of left me stunned. I stood there and didn't say anything and shrugged my shoulders. That's when he started to shake the bag. I don't really know how else to describe what he was doing. He was just shaking the bag up and down. I never actually saw what was inside, but it sounded like a whole bunch of metal cookie cutters rattling around. The contents were poking and stretching the bag out in weird angles. He was still staring at me as he shook the bag and inched closer to me. "Are you sure you don't know where Melanie is?" He continued to shake the bag as he got closer and closer until we were nearly touching. My breath was shaky, and I was looking down at the ground like a dog that had just gotten in trouble for peeing on the couch. Then I snapped and pushed him away from me as hard as I could. His skin was flabby and soft, and his shirt felt greasy. I used all my strength to get him away from me. I didn't look back as I did a 180 and sped back into my house, slamming the door once I was back inside. I could hear him pound his heavy arms against the door and the clamoring of whatever was in that bag. He banged on the door for maybe 30 seconds before he stopped abruptly. I quickly sped towards the window to see if he was still standing there. As I moved to the side to get a better angle of the doorway, I saw him looking back at me. When we met eyes, he immediately started running back to his van, which was parked across the street. I recognized it as the same one from Riverside. I was disappointed to see that there weren't any front license plate numbers, but as the van started to move and pass my house, I took down the numbers and letters that were on the back of the van. I still have them written down in my phone. Since that incident, I haven't seen the man since, and I notified Melanie that some man was asking around for her. She said that she had no idea who that might be, and that she would tell her parents to look out for anyone that looked like who I had seen, just in case he managed to find her or her house. But it doesn't end there. About a year later, my mom and I were out having lunch, and she was scrolling through Facebook when she came upon a post from a woman who lived in the neighborhood next to ours. The woman wrote that a man driving a white van drove up to her house and knocked on the door, which her young daughter answered. The man had apparently asked her to get in his van because he had the circus in there. Apparently the mom came to the door in time before anything bad happened. but the man was still being creepy. Unfortunately, the woman didn't post a description of the man, but she definitely remembered the white van. Now, I don't know exactly what this circus means, but I am almost positive it's the same man that visited my house. And I am pretty sure that he's still out there preying on people, because just yesterday on the local news they interviewed a 9-year-old girl who was approached by a man driving a white van. So please, if you live in the central Illinois area of the US, please look out for anyone or anything matching what I said in my story. This creep is most likely still out there, because he keeps coming up on social media and the news. Stay safe, everyone. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 305. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. You know, I really think we should be grateful to the creepers in the stories there. They were at least courteous enough to signal their creepiness, most of them anyway, by driving the appropriate colour of vehicle. The day they realise we're onto them, it's going to be a very dark day indeed. They'll start buying a maroon sedan or a pink people carrier with polka dots. And with that image, I'm going to leave you for now. So, until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.